Hi folks, welcome again. I'm going to talk to you today about modeling assumptions in TM1, and to do that I'm going to contrast it with modeling assumptions in enterprise planning. The reason I'm doing this is a separate video. Normally this would be just included in one of my modeling videos. I want to do it separately because I've noticed over the last couple of months a number of customers who've migrated from enterprise planning are using the same approach to modeling their assumptions in TM1 as they did in enterprise planning. And that's not really the best way to do it, either for maintenance or performance or just overall efficiency. It can be done in a much better way. And typically, just having a look at it for any customer will show you pretty quickly why it's a better way to do things. So I want to spend some time on it today. We'll start in enterprise planning, look at the problem there, and then we'll see how we can do a better job of it in TM1. So let's get started. So in this video, which is a rather astonishing 8 years old now, I'm demonstrating a very simple set of price and cost assumptions populating a revenue volume sort of cube where we've got the units sold and we're referencing our price and cost assumptions from a separate cube. Building a D-link that will allow me to use my price and cost from that assumptions cube in my volume cube. My volume cube in this case having 6 fairly small dimensions, so not a particularly sparse cube, which of course we wouldn't have built with enterprise planning because it has a limited ability to cope with sparsity. Now to perform all of my gross margin calculations, my cost of goods sold and so on, I needed to have those price and cost values stored in my larger volume cube. There was really no other way to do it. And because the cube wasn't particularly sparse in the first place, adding 2 measures to my gross margin dimension had only a marginal impact on the overall size and performance of that cube. Now before we move on, I will point out that I'm using the term assumptions here to mean lower dimensionality values that are referenced in many other places, probably in higher dimensional cubes. So in this case, and some people will have noticed, I've called it an assumptions cube, and we often use that term in enterprise planning to refer to cubes which did not contain the E-list. Of course, mine in this case does, but I hope you understand that what we mean here is just using values of lower dimensionality anywhere else in a larger cube. So let's take a look now at how I might tackle this problem in TM1 and maybe do it a bit more efficiently. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I did build an almost exact replica of that model in TM1. So if we look at my channels, if we look at my E-list, I even actually created a dimension called E-list. Can you believe that? I've reproduced everything that we had in the previous model, with the exception that, and this is largely just to demonstrate to you the difference, one of the key differences in why you'd want to be using TM1, I couldn't find my indoor-outdoor product sample that I'd used so many years ago. So I decided instead to populate my products dimension with SKU level information for 827,000 products, which is probably not something we'd have done as well or attempted with enterprise planning. But of course with TM1, again, 64-bit in-memory engine, a lot more capable of handling larger dimensions. So if I wanted to do, for example, SKU level planning, I could do that. Now, having learned expression modeling in enterprise planning, one of the first things I might try to do, and it's the thing I don't want you to do, is to create a link at this level. When you create a link at this level, it doesn't understand the sparsity of the cube, how its resulting reference value is going to be used, or anything like that. Much better to create a cube calculation to properly reflect the data values that are in the cube and manage that sparsity. So it's very easy. We're going to take a look at it. But the other thing that I would do that I also don't want you to do in this case is to create a dimension calculation for that. Those get reused in every cube that I create, but as often happened, of course, a calculation dimension like gross margin would probably only be used in one cube in enterprise planning. And dimension calculations also at that level don't have a deep understanding of the values that are in the cube and how they could properly reflect the density of that cube. So we're going to do this much more efficiently with a cube calculation. So let's have a look at the cubes that we're going to talk about here. So first, my product price and cost This is the assumptions cube I was describing, which just has my price and cost values, my versions, my E-list in this case, as well as all of our products, which we have a very substantial number of in this case. And let's look at our revenue plan. So I'll stack these here so we can see them both. And in this case, I've got my gross margin reproduced exactly as it was in the previous portion. I have my months. I also have my E-list and my product list and my channels. So this is more dimensionality, and in fact I've forgotten one. I've forgotten my version, so we'll throw that in here as well, and we'll just copy our data to all of our versions. Now the first thing that I would say about this particular cube here, my volume cube, which has more dimensionality, is that although I'm using the same dimension here that we did previously for a gross margin, which includes price and cost, I typically wouldn't do that. I would leave my price and cost completely in the other cube. We're not even going to populate this in the beginning. We may look at that after, but what's critical about this cube is of course my expressions for gross sales, my units times my price, my cost of goods sold, or cost of sales, which is going to be my cost times units, and the associated calculations for gross margin percent, and so on. The reason I'm not worried about my price and cost, and this is probably the most important point in this video, is that I don't need to populate that in this cube. I can reference those values in my expression without them being in the same cube. So before I build this expression for my gross sales, I am going to save my cube because I've made a structural change to it. If I've added anything, I wouldn't see that in my calculation editor. We'll create a cube calculation here called gross sales, and we'll make that a little bigger so I can work and explain very quickly how a cube calculation works. So this will be specific to the cube that I'm creating it in, and the power of the cube calculation editor is that it allows me to easily scope my expression. So for example, if I were calculating gross sales for my plan, but for my actuals I actually didn't want to calculate that, I just wanted to reference it or use it as it was, I can create exactly the scope that I want here. So if I had a actual slice, I could tick that this only applies to my budget versions, or the reverse. I can scope this any way that I like. Now in fact I don't need to for this one, but it's a really powerful capability that I know you'll come to love if you've come from enterprise planning. Within the editor itself, you'll see that I've got a place for leaf level or lowest level expressions, consolidated level expressions, which you might think of as weighted averages, time averages, that sort of thing. And then I've got a third section for string expression. Now you recall in the beginning I said I'm not going to use a link and that you ought not use links, and of course by that I mean the higher level links which don't have a scope. Cube calculations have a defined scope and a way of calculating where things should actually occur. And we'll explain that in a moment as I create a link within a cube calculation to make this happen. So my link is going to be called price because that's what I'm going to be retrieving for this. And I need a source cube, which, no surprise, is going to be my product price and cost. And you'll see here that just like we'd have done in Analyst, we've mapped the dimensions which exist in both cubes, so my versions, my E-list, and my indoor and outdoor products, automatically by description, because that's typically what I'd want to do, and that's going to save me some time, taking a little bit longer with those 860,000 members. Now I'm going to click on my price and cost. I'm going to slice on my price, that's all I'm going to put in this expression. And I'm going to slice on my gross sales over here. And at that you might pause and say, but this is price, aren't I mapping this to price? Well in fact, like I said, we're not going to populate that price in the target cube, although we may look at a way to do that later. This is to support my gross sales calculation, so I want to make sure that that value is targeting my gross sales expression. Now of course our channels, I want this to all be the same, and my months, I want this to all be the same. So I'll click OK, and now I've got a price link that I can use. And the most critical part of that is because I'm calculating gross sales, I'm going to multiply that by my units. And what's going to happen as a result is not trivial. Where I don't have a unit, so for example if there are products which I don't sell in some channels, some regions, what have you, I would end up with a 0 from this expression. So my price times 0 would be 0.
With that, we know exactly how to deal with the sparsity in this cube, and we properly only calculate gross sales in those places where we have units sold. Whether those already exist or someone enters them as part of a plan, we know exactly how to calculate it. So now if I apply this expression, we'll get our correct value for gross sales. And we'll just move things around so you can see that better here. But we had a price of 20 for A1 for this product SKU. And we can see that that's properly being multiplied here to give me 2,000 as my gross sales. Now, a similar expression in enterprise planning without that knowledge of scope and which elements actually have figures, I'd have been attempting to calculate just there about 160 million cells worth of values. By using populated intersections, we vastly reduced this. It's still just as simple for me to create the expression, but it's a lot more efficient. So the last thing I'll show you, as promised, is what if I really wanted to see my price? Now, every client interface we have has an easy way to do that visually without having to do this sort of expression to create price here. And that is a far better approach to doing this. But if you're absolutely adamant that you want to see your price and cost in this larger dimension cube without taking on additional performance weight, there is a way that you can do that. We've covered it in another video as well, but I'll show you here. If I wanted to reference my price by creating another cube calculation, what I would do, and you'll recall this from how I described our expression in terms of knowing where real values exist. So I'll only have to show my price where I have a unit sold. What I would do is create a comparable link again. So with my product price and cost, choosing just price, do this for all my channels, all my months. And in this case, I will target my price value here. I could have mapped those as well. We'll bring that in. You'll recall I said in the previous expression that the key was ensuring that this would only happen where there were non-zero values in my units, where I'd actually sold something. So to do that, from an expression perspective, all I need to do is multiply that by my units divided by my units, which of course you'll know mathematically that's just 1 if I have a unit. It's 0 if I don't have a unit. So what this is going to do is properly feed that expression to only occur where I've got units sold, but do that very easily here with this expression. And now we can see my price alongside. Again, there are much better ways to do this. If you're using Cognos Insight, you could have a separate widget that's linked and synchronized to my revenue plan that demonstrates this. If I'm in TM1 application web, I could have a view like this one where they're stacked. If I'm in Cafe, I could have a separate cube view showing that, or the data values from that cube view showing that. Very easy to do from a UI perspective without trying to do this in the model. But again, if you absolutely must, this is the approach that you would want to take to be the most efficient. I say the most efficient. There is one slightly more efficient way that I might show you later, but for this video, I think that's probably enough. So now hopefully you guys see how this can be done in TM1 in a really efficient way. Again, this is, if this were fully populated, this is 160 million potential cell cube, and I've just done this on my laptop here in a few moments. This is really efficient, and this is definitely how you want to do your assumptions volume planning. So thanks very much for your time, and happy modeling.